a human rights group recently released a report about the labor prison camps in eastern Ukraine. Now, this report says that a lot of Ukrainian prisoners are being mistreated in the Luhansk region, which is occupied by the Russian-backed separatist forces. Now, we're here joined by one of the authors of this report and the director of Eastern Human Rights Group, Pavel Lysianskiy. Welcome. And we're going to be talking about what this report means and what is being done for these prisoners. So, what are some of the striking findings of this report?
The main point of this report is the finding of forced labour in prisons on the territories of the so-called LPR. The prisoners in that region cannot refuse to do manual labour. They are basically forced to work as slaves. This report talks about the prisoners who are serving time according to Ukrainian law and who started serving their time before the start of the war in 2014. This report is about them.
You write that over 5,000 prisoners are currently being mistreated in the occupied territories.
We monitored and spoke to relatives. We also used different sources and checked the information. And yes, according to our calculations, on the territories of the so-called LPR, there are currently 5,000 people held in prisons.
And you believe that most of them are being mistreated and are being kept in these prisons where they're forced to work and they're forced to do manual labor, but they're not being well paid for it. And in fact, that it depends if that they don't work, that they will be beaten, and sometimes they're even killed in some cases.
We are scared for their well-being, so we didn't disclose their names. But in some cases, we list their names when we talk about the abuse of their rights. But right now, because these people are forced to work, they are not being paid for it. They're basically treated as slaves. And this has been proven by different sources. After our report was published, we received feedback from experts which confirm what we've written in the report.
Now, can you tell us some of the most striking cases that you heard, some accounts from prisoners themselves?
The case of Alexander Yefreshin. He started serving his sentence in 2011. And in 2014, he was included in the amnesty, which was announced by President Poroshenko. And in our report, we include the documents which prove that, according to a Ukrainian court, Alexander was supposed to be freed. But the leaders of the so-called LPR say that they don't abide by Ukrainian law, and they deny that these people were convicted by Ukraine. And they respond with their so-called official documents, saying that Ukraine to them is a foreign country, and they will release them only when Ukraine signs an official agreement with us. And this will never happen, because Ukraine will never recognize the LPR. The people who are serving their time have fallen into a trap. They're being held hostage. They're being held as labor for industry. Because of their work, the so-called leaders of the LPR are becoming rich. Whilst the prisoners are forced to work, they have no other choice. In Ukraine, if a prisoner works, he gets compensated, and his term gets shortened. A mechanism kicks in for correctional work. The LPR has none of this, and I understand that 40% of our report needs to be checked, but the leaders of the so-called LPR don't allow international organizations like the Red Cross, the OSCE and the UN inside their territories.
How many prisoners have already currently served their sentences but are still being held captive by the Russian-backed separatist forces?
Approximately 30% of the overall number of prisoners.
From 5,000 prisoners, 30% have already served their sentences but are still being held captive. I see. So how do you think the Ukrainian government should deal or should have some kind of strategy of dealing with this sort of issue?
There's a Minsk peace talks platform where this question can be raised by some groups, like this was done with the so-called DPR regarding the prisoners. This way they can serve their time in Ukraine, where there are laws and regulations which they can also use, so that they can use the legal field of their country.
What do you think is going to happen to all of these prisoners?
The prisoners who are being held illegally in captivity will return to their homes on the territory of Ukraine, and they will go to Ukrainian courts and a European Human Rights Court, and they will sue the government because they were held in prison illegally, and European courts will rule in their favour because this is an abuse of their human rights. Ukraine will come under fire when there are going to be a number of these cases, and the EU court will send them to Ukraine, who will have to give them a payout for the violation of their basic rights.
The Ukrainian government will have to pay for this.
There are special articles in the Ukrainian budget which were incorporated especially for cases like this. A portion of the budget is allocated for plaintiffs who win human rights court cases against the government in a European court. Therefore, the Ukrainian government will have no choice but to pay, because the ruling of the European court is a source of law in Ukraine. However, this will be great, because it will mean that these people have come out of this ordeal alive. But right now, this is a real danger, that if these people continue working like they are right now for several years, they might simply not be able to walk out of prisons alive.
I see. Most of these prisoners, some would say, are now being used as bargaining chips by the Russian-backed separatist forces. They're essentially hostages if they are being held captive and they've already served their time. Do you agree with this? And should they be treated by the Ukrainian government as hostages?
I just want to say that, first of all, that these prisoners are citizens of Ukraine. Yes, they are serving time, but they are Ukrainians, and the Ukrainian government should be taking care of its citizens. It doesn't matter if they are seen as prisoners or hostages. The important fact remains that they are Ukrainians, and according to Ukrainian law, some of them are supposed to be already released. Now, that is the important issue.
Вони повинні бути на волі. Оце